Johnny Carson lowered his microphone, Doc Severinsen stopped the orchestra, and the 400-person studio fell into silence because Burt Reynolds was walking off the show, but what he said when he turned back changed everything. The cameras were rolling live. 4 million Americans watching from their living rooms. The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, Studio One at NBC Burbank, Tuesday night, March 14, 1978. Johnny Carson sat behind his wooden desk in his classic three-piece suit, that familiar half-smile on his face as he introduced his next guest. Ladies and gentlemen, you know him from Smokey and the Bandit, Deliverance, and about a dozen magazine covers your wives keep hiding from you, Burt Reynolds. The audience erupted. The band played. Burt walked out from behind the rainbow curtain with that trademark swagger, waving to the crowd, flashing that famous mustache-framed grin. He looked like a man on top of the world. The biggest movie star in America. Box office gold. Women wanted him. Men wanted to be him. He shook Johnny's hand, settled into the orange guest chair, crossed his legs. Perfect talk show posture. He'd done this 100 times. Burt, good to see you, Johnny said, shuffling his cue cards. You look like you just walked off a movie set. I did, Burt laughed. About 3 hours ago. Still have the bruises to prove it. The audience laughed. Johnny leaned forward. Now I heard something interesting about the new film you're working on. And that's when Burt's smile faltered. Just for a second. A flicker across his face that most people wouldn't notice. But Johnny Carson noticed everything. Burt's jaw tightened. His hand gripped the armrest of the chair. Actually, Johnny, before we talk about the film, I need to tell you something. The studio went quiet. This wasn't how these interviews worked. There was a rhythm, a dance. Johnny asked questions, guests told funny stories, everyone laughed, roll credits. Carson stopped mid-question. The entire studio froze. Johnny set down his cue cards. Slowly. Deliberately. That movement alone told everyone watching, both in the studio and at home, that something was different tonight. Okay, Johnny said, his voice gentle. What do you need to tell me? Burt looked out at the audience. 400 faces staring back at him. Then he looked at the cameras. 4 million people watching. Then he looked down at his hands. My father died yesterday. The words hung in the air like smoke. No one moved. No one breathed. Johnny's expression shifted immediately, the professional host mask dropping away, replaced by something raw and human. Burt, I'm so sorry. Why are you here? You should be. I know where I should be. Burt interrupted, his voice rough. But I came here because I needed to tell this story. And I needed to tell it tonight. On your show. Johnny glanced toward the control room, then back at Burt. Okay. Whatever you need. Burt took a deep breath. My father was a police chief. Small town in Florida. Riviera Beach. He was the kind of man who believed in rules, discipline, doing things the right way. When I told him I wanted to be an actor, you know what he said? Johnny shook his head. He said, that's not a real job, son. That's pretending. Men don't pretend for a living. Burt's voice cracked slightly. We didn't speak for 2 years after that. 2 years. The audience was completely silent. Even Ed McMahon, usually ready with a perfectly timed quip, sat motionless in his announcer's chair. Eventually we patched things up. Burt continued. Sort of. He came to see me in some plays. Never said much about them. But he came. And when I started getting movie roles, small parts, he'd asked about them. Never watched the movies, but he'd ask. Burt paused, gathering himself. Last year, Smokey and the Bandit came out. Biggest hit of my career. I'm on magazine covers. I'm getting offered every script in Hollywood. And you know what my father said when I called to tell him? What? Johnny asked softly. He said, I still don't understand what you do, but I'm proud you're doing it well. Burt's eyes were glistening now. That was it. That was the closest he ever came to saying he was proud of me. Johnny leaned forward, his elbows on the desk. Burt. Yesterday morning, Burt interrupted again, his voice getting rougher. I was on a movie set in Arizona. We were shooting this scene. I was doing a stunt, something stupid and dangerous that I probably shouldn't have been doing myself. And I got a phone call. My father had a heart attack. By the time I got to Florida, he was already gone. The cameras stayed locked on Burt's face. The control room had stopped giving directions. Everyone understood they were witnessing something real. When I got to his house, Burt said, I found something in his bedroom. In the drawer of his nightstand. You know what it was? Johnny shook his head. Every single magazine cover I'd ever been on. Every interview. Every article. He'd cut them out and saved them. There must have been 50, 60 clippings in there. All organized by date. All carefully preserved. Burt's voice broke completely. He never told me. He never said a word. But he kept every single one. Subscribe and leave a comment, because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Johnny Carson did something he'd never done in 15 years of hosting The Tonight Show. He stood up from behind his desk, walked around it, and sat on the edge, right next to Burt's chair. Close enough to reach out and touch his shoulder. I'm so sorry, Johnny said quietly. Burt nodded, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. I came here tonight because I didn't want to be alone. And because my father, for all his issues with what I do, he loved this show. He watched you every single night. It was the only show he'd stay up for. He'd fall asleep in his chair watching you, and my mother would have to wake him up and send him to bed. Johnny smiled sadly. A lot of fathers do that. Yeah, but here's the thing, Burt said, his voice stronger now. I was supposed to be on your show last month. You had me booked. Remember? Johnny nodded. You had to cancel. Scheduling conflict. Right. A movie thing came up, and I canceled. And my father was so disappointed. He told my mother, Burt was supposed to be on Carson tonight. He was going to record it. He had a whole thing planned. Burt took a shaky breath. And I canceled. For a movie. For money. For my career. The audience was crying now. Not scattered tears, almost everyone. Grown men. Women. Teenagers. All of them understanding the weight of regret. So when I got the call from your producers yesterday, Burt continued, asking if I was still okay to do tonight's show, I almost said no. I almost said I needed to be with my family, handle the arrangements, do all the things you're supposed to do when your father dies. But then I thought, he wanted to see me on this show. He wanted to watch me talk to you. So maybe in some way, if I come here tonight and I tell this story, maybe that counts. Maybe he's watching. Backstage, he made a choice no producer would have ever allowed. Burt suddenly stood up. Not the casual standing that happens at the end of an interview. This was abrupt. Urgent. He stepped away from the orange chair, away from Johnny, toward the edge of the stage. The audience gasped. Johnny stood up from the desk edge, confused. Burt? Burt walked toward the backstage entrance, toward the rainbow curtain he'd emerged from 15 minutes earlier. The cameras followed him. The control room erupted in whispered chaos. Cut to commercial? Stay with it? What's happening? Johnny made a split-second decision. He signaled to Doc Severinsen, a hand gesture, palm down. The universal sign for stop. The orchestra went silent. The studio went silent. Burt stopped at the curtain. His hand on the fabric. His back to the audience. And then he turned around. His face was streaked with tears, but he was smiling. That famous Burt Reynolds smile, but transformed by grief into something more honest than anything Hollywood had ever seen from him. I'm sorry, Burt said, his voice echoing in the silent studio. I can't do this. Johnny walked toward him, crossing the distance between the desk and the stage entrance. Burt, it's okay. You don't have to. No, you don't understand, Burt interrupted. I can't do this interview. I can't sit there and talk about my movies and tell funny stories and pretend like everything is normal. Because it's not normal. My father is dead. And I miss my chance to tell him that I understood why he was hard on me. I miss my chance to tell him that he was right, that what I do is pretending, and that's okay, because pretending can matter too. I miss my chance to say thank you for those 2 years of silence, because they taught me that approval from the people you love is earned, not given. The studio was holding its breath. Burt reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. This morning, before I flew here, I wrote something. A letter to my father. Things I should have said. Things I wanted to say. He unfolded it, his hands shaking. Johnny, would you let me read this? On your show? Would you let me say goodbye to him this way? But this was the moment no one in the studio, nor anyone at home, could ever forget. Johnny Carson, the man who'd interviewed presidents and movie stars and cultural icons, who'd maintained perfect professional distance for 15 years, who'd built a career on controlled spontaneity and perfectly timed comedy, made a decision that would define his legacy more than any joke he ever told. He walked over to Burt, took the letter from his hands, and then did something extraordinary. He led Burt back to the guest chair. He sat down in his own chair behind the desk. And then he picked up the letter and began to read it himself. Not Burt. Johnny. Burt collapsed back into the orange chair, sobbing, as Johnny Carson read his letter to his dead father on live television. Johnny's voice was steady, gentle, carrying the weight of Burt's words across the studio and into 4 million American homes. Dad, I know you never understood what I do. I know you wanted me to have a real job, something solid, something that made sense to you. But here's what I need you to know. Every time I step in front of a camera, every time I make people laugh or feel something, I'm using the discipline you taught me. The work ethic. The belief that if you're going to do something, do it all the way. You taught me that. Every good review, every successful film, every moment when I get it right, that's you. That's the police chief from Riviera Beach showing up in his son's work. I'm sorry I didn't tell you that before. I'm sorry I thought your approval didn't matter. It mattered more than anything. I love you. I'll miss you. And I promise I'll make you proud. Buddy. The nickname hit different. Buddy. The name his father called him before Hollywood turned him into Burt Reynolds, movie star. Johnny set the letter down gently on his desk. His eyes were wet. Ed McMahon was openly crying. The audience was silent except for the sound of 400 people trying to breathe through tears. Burt looked up at Johnny. Thank you? Johnny nodded. Then he turned to the camera, not the funny host turn, but something real. We're going to take a break, he said softly. And when we come back, I don't know what we're going to do, but we're going to figure it out together. The show cut to commercial. During those 3 minutes, something happened that would become tonight's show legend. Burt stood up and walked into the audience. Not to leave. To connect. He shook hands. He hugged strangers. He thanked them for crying with him. He told them their fathers would be proud of them too. Johnny stayed at his desk, holding that letter. When they came back from commercial, Johnny made an announcement. Folks, Burt and I have decided something. We're not going to do the rest of the planned show. We're going to spend the next 20 minutes talking about fathers. About loss. About saying the things we need to say before we can't say them anymore. If you want to change the channel, we understand. But if you want to stay, stay. Nobody changed the channel. For the next 20 minutes, Johnny and Burt talked. Really talked. About their fathers. About regret. About love. About the weird spaces men occupy where they can't quite say what they mean until it's too late. The switchboard at NBC lit up like a Christmas tree. Not complaints. Calls from people saying thank you. From people saying they were going to call their fathers right now. From people saying they'd been holding grief for years and this helped. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. After the show, Johnny did something he'd never done before. He had that letter, Burt's letter to his father, professionally preserved and framed. He kept it in his office at NBC for the next 14 years, until his retirement. Burt Reynolds went to his father's funeral 2 days later. He read that letter again, out loud, in front of his family. He said Johnny Carson had given him permission to grieve publicly, and it changed everything. Years later, when young hosts asked Johnny for advice, he'd point to that framed letter and say, "Sometimes the show isn't the show. Sometimes it's just being human with someone who needs it." Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. The letter still exists. After Johnny's death, it was given to Burt. He carried it with him until he died in 2018. In his final interview, he said, "That night on Carson's show, I learned that the best performance of my life wasn't in any movie. It was being honest about missing my father. The night Burt walked off and came back changed television. It proved that real emotion could exist in a medium built on entertainment. And it proved that Johnny Carson wasn't just the king of late night. He was the man who knew when to stop being a host and start being a human being."